It's time to talk about autism. Hey y'all, this is the first video that I am making where it's like the podcast format. So I apologize if I'm not looking into the camera. I am reading off of a script because I'm not at the point in my life where I can just blab at a camera and spew out cohesive thoughts. But anyways, today I wanted to talk about something that's very personal to me in my journey with mental health, and that is the fear of not being autistic enough, or in other words, autistic imposter syndrome. And I think this is especially common for late diagnosed autistic people because we have essentially spent our whole lives resonating with the identity of being allistic. Or maybe that wasn't even a conscious identifying label that we gave ourselves, but nevertheless we just didn't identify as autistic. And so for me, the autism diagnosis that I received when I was 17 completely changed how I viewed myself for my motivations, behaviors, and struggles. I struggled with mental health growing up since I was diagnosed with OCD at age 10, and I have dealt with other generalized social anxieties, but none of these diagnoses really felt like they encompassed my experiences in full. And at first, I didn't give much thought to my autism diagnosis. However, after I started researching more about autism spectrum disorder, I have become so more in tune with myself, have been able to manage my mental health issues better, purely by analyzing my experience from an autistic lens. I have also found a greater acceptance of myself as a person in general. So basically, I've just found a community in which I felt like I truly belonged in. And now this is where the imposter syndrome comes into play. So after getting comfortable with this new identity, it's very normal to start to question if you truly belong within this community or not. I'll be having thoughts where I'll think I wasn't diagnosed for 17 years, and my experience with autism is a lot different from someone else's, or I don't think I struggle that much with sensory issues, or I don't think my special interests are to the same extent of other autistic people's special interests. But these thoughts are just on the path to make my autistic sense of identity crumble. And I'm not saying that I am questioning whether I am autistic or not. Instead, I'm more so wondering how autistic I am. How much do I really fit in with the autistic population? So in other words, am I autistic enough for this to be a core part of my identity? So how do we work through these thoughts is what I've long been wondering. And first of all, I think it's important to discuss how while autism is a spectrum, it is not a linear spectrum in which someone could be more autistic or less autistic. Instead, we generally use the autism wheel to describe how much each factor on the wheel impacts our daily lives. And the number one mistake I make when spiraling about this is placing less emphasis on the fact that every autistic person is vastly different. Just because I don't feel like I have strong sensory difficulties or don't think I have a true special interest doesn't mean that I'm not autistic. It just means that other people may have different autistic experiences than I do, and that doesn't make me any less autistic in my own self. And it's also important to point out that of the people who have relatively an easy access to diagnostic tools, later diagnosed autistic people are probably very high masking, hence why an autism assessment wasn't considered earlier in life. And by masking, I'm referring to the conscious or unconscious, emphasize on that one, suppression of typical autistic behaviors. This could be stimming, copying others to appear more normal in social settings, forcing eye contact, and pushing through sensory discomfort, just to name a few. And when you grow up masking for years and years, it's probably very hard to unmask because you may not be able to tell when you are masking. You've been doing it so long that it's just an unconscious behavior. And I also want to note that masking is not inherently a bad practice. It is often a form of safety for autistic individuals in certain settings. However, prolonged masking can lead to burnout and the loss of your sense of self. So I personally consider myself to be high masking, but when I was younger, I definitely displayed certain typical autistic behaviors, I was very sensitive to noise. I would cry when there were fireworks. I would bring noise-canceling headphones to like Disneyland parks and on loud Disney rides, car races. I was also very obsessed with monkeys, Chrysler Pacificas, certain like horror rituals that you read on the creepypasta Reddit. And even at one point, I was just obsessed with the idea of moving to London. And while I didn't necessarily know a lot about these topics or pursue research on my own time, except for my interest in astronomy, I just had such an intense fixation on them. I was also unable to comprehend books when they were read to me, especially when I was doing another activity at the same time, because of my auditory processing disorder. And I think that the main sign was that I had pretty bad OCD. I would refuse to touch sink handles, desks at school, walk through certain doorways, and even refrain from saying certain words that I seemed like were dangerous. And ASD is commonly misdiagnosed with OCD because a lot of things like the desire for routine and order and just general anxieties can overlap. And when I say misdiagnosed, I don't mean to say that I did not have OCD or that individuals who were diagnosed with OCD and then later were diagnosed with autism didn't have OCD either. I am just saying that the OCD diagnosis was not enough to encompass the experiences of myself. And so to compare this to a medical context, this is taken from ChatGPT because I don't have that much knowledge on this. Let's say you go to a doctor and they run a blood test and find that your certain like antibody levels are elevated, which could indicate like an autoimmune disorder. But then these antibodies can also be elevated with other conditions that are not inherently an autoimmune disorder. So assuming your doctor has your best interest, they would run more tests to see if it actually is an autoimmune disorder or something else in addition or in entirety. So essentially what I'm saying is that if OCD and autism have a strong overlap, and this can definitely apply to ADHD too, if you are diagnosed with OCD or ADHD and you don't feel like it accurately explains all that you were trying to figure out about yourself, it's very reasonable to seek out an autism diagnosis or look more into yourself. And the consequences of misdiagnosis just leads to prolonged anxiety and difficulty with everyday life for those individuals who don't yet understand that they are autistic. So going off my tangent there, but bringing this conversation back to our main topic, I'm trying to make the point that there were many clues that I was autistic when I was younger. They were just hidden from my sight and from others because they could be labeled off as common sensory difficulties even among allistic people, quirky interests, and just purely OCD. And the more that I'm looking into autism now, I'm starting to realize just how many signs there are that actually make me feel very confident in my diagnosis. So for example, now that I am more aware when I am masking, I can notice more sensory discomforts and discomforts. I have been better able to analyze my past romantic relationships through the lens of autistic limerence, which I'll probably make a whole entire separate video on because that's a big topic. And I've just been generally better equipped to manage depressive episodes after realizing that many of them seem more like an autistic meltdown or a sensory overload. And the common autistic experience of not belonging to any defined social group or not fitting in with the people around you, speaking primarily from personal experiences, is proof in itself that you may start to question how well you fit in even with the autistic community. And every time I have a doubt about my identity, sometime within the next week or so, I'll usually have an experience that further makes me feel validated in my diagnosis again. Autism affects how you process and interact with the world around you, and yes, certain autistic behaviors may be more prevalent at some times than others. And when I'm questioning my identity, I'm often searching through times in my life in which autism has negatively impacted me, because we tend to focus on the sensory and social issues and meltdowns as core autistic behaviors. But I'm often unaware of the times in which I am experiencing sensory joy, or when I am truly enjoying myself because I'm pursuing a strong interest, or even when I'm just merely thriving at the moment because I am in a structured environment. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if I am, or even if you are, truly autistic. If you have done your research and believe that you are autistic, and especially if you find that common autistic accommodations can greatly improve your daily life, then I personally don't see the harm in identifying yourself as autistic. There is not one method to diagnose autism, and not even the most detailed diagnostic criteria will be able to understand your experiences from your own mind. Only you will. Labels are just things that we have created to make sense of ourselves and the world around us, and in that sense, they should be helpful. But constantly worrying about which label you should identify with is not helpful or beneficial to your own well-being. So to end this conversation, I just wanted to restate that your feelings and your experiences are valid. And while it's completely normal to question the nature of yourself from time to time, I think we should all try to redirect our thinking when it becomes inherently harmful to our sense of self.